Hey guys, welcome back. So today's vlog has been on my to-do list for about 6 months now.
About twice as long as that.
No, it's been since April.
Yeah, she put it off because she didn't want me in the video.
Y'all haven't seen Stan around lately, but he's still here. He hasn't gone anywhere.
Unshaven and
yeah. So today's vlog, we're going to be talking about why our family has chosen adoption and why we feel like what we have to share could be beneficial to some of you who might have adoption on your heart or you've thought about it in the past. And so we're just going to kind of take you through our thought processes, what our journey was like. If you don't know who we are, my name is Ashley. This is Stan. We've been married for almost 24 years. We have a big family. So we have 4 biological kids. The oldest is almost 22, married, and has 2 babies. And then we have an 18-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And then we brought in 2 precious little girls into our family through international adoption. Michaela has been here for 5 years? 5 years. We adopted her from the Philippines. And then Isabel has been in our family for 4 years, and we adopted her from China. And we are currently in another adoption process, adopting a little girl from China. Due to the pandemic, it is shut down. We've been waiting, and over about 400 other families have been waiting for well over 2 years to bring our kids home. So we really don't know when that will happen, but that's where we're at. Adoption is very near and dear to our hearts, and we want to use our presence here on YouTube to hopefully influence and encourage other families to step into adoption, because we feel like it's the greatest blessing that our family has ever experienced. So we're going to cut right to it. I told Stan not to talk too much. He likes to kind of go down rabbit holes and stuff, so we'll see how that goes. So before we even knew adoption was going to enter our world, like I told you earlier, we already had 4 biological kids. We were comfortable with life. Stan is in law enforcement. I stay home with the kids, homeschool our kids, and we had just moved into a new home, and we were just moving and grooving. We had talked about adoption in the past, you know, just here and there, and thought, well, maybe one day that would be nice for our family. But as you can imagine, you know, 4 kids is already a lot. Living off of 1 income, we decided to kind of pretty much put that on the back burner until 2014, where the Lord really showed us very clearly that He was calling us to adoption. At that point in time, we had not discussed whether we were going to do foster care, international adoption, domestic adoption, special needs, or whatever. We honestly had never discussed any of those things. It was literally the Lord showed me a little girl in the Philippines, and He said we are to adopt. And that's really how we ended up internationally. And within that program in the Philippines, they only did special needs adoptions, primarily back then. And so that was just kind of like, okay, well, that's where we're supposed to go, and let's just go and do this thing.
So for us, it wasn't really about adding more kids to our family. We were open to having more kids, but you know, as financially, we just decided that we were done. So I really believe God had gotten us to that point to where when He called us to adopt, we wouldn't have that in the back of our mind of, you know, was this really us, or was this God calling us? Because I can tell you right now, there was no intention for us to adopt after the 4 kids. We were open to it, but we had no plans. And so when He called us to adopt, we were ready to you know, follow Him and what He has asked us to do. But you know, we're planners, and there was no plan here. It was totally following Him.
So yeah, so that was our primary reason, and really only reason in choosing adoption, was just choosing to obey Christ and what He was calling our family to do. So after about 1.5 years, the Lord led us to little Michaela, precious. We traveled to the Philippines in December 2016 and brought her home. And let me just say, she was exactly what the Lord has showed me. Because I know some people are like, really? You making that stuff up? How do you know the Lord showed you these things? He just did. He showed me a little toddler girl with chunky cheeks, big brown eyes, and she had pigtails. So when we traveled to the Philippines to bring Michaela home, we were able to spend 2 days at her orphanage. It was a very small orphanage. I think there were 14 or 15 kids in there. I mean, we couldn't have asked for a better place for Mika to have spent her first 4 years of life. They loved her. They doted on her. She was the queen bee. But our eyes were really open when we went there, and I don't think we were quite prepared, as I'm about to cry because that's what I do. While they took such great care of those kids, they truly did, what we saw is there is still never enough care, never enough attention that these nannies and caregivers can give each individual child.
Because the truth is, as great as her orphanage was, and as great as the nannies were, and the people that were there, they can never compare to a mom and dad in a home. It's just like, people have to understand, adoption's a great thing for people to come along and adopt. But it can never compare with biological family staying intact. And so, while you may find orphanages and you think, well, you know, these kids aren't like those from Isabel's orphanage, where, you know, they weren't taken care of as well. There's still a need, even when the orphanages are good, because an orphanage is not a place for a child. A home with a mother and father is.
Yeah. So, we spent 2 days there, loved our time there, and we visited with the other orphans as much as possible. We played with them, held them, all of those great things. And as we were leaving on the second day, we took Mika, we got in the car, and we were driving away, or we were getting ready to drive away. Now, Mika was happy to go. She was A-okay. And I remember Santa and
we thought we were going to be... We thought we were worried that Mika was going to cry and scream, and that was going to be the problem. And Mika was happy.
Yeah.
And it was us who were surprised by our emotional reaction.
Yeah, because you look back, we literally looked back. We saw a handful of the orphans and the nannies standing at the metal gate with their little heads poking through the little bars. And I just was like, a lot of those kids won't have a family that will come for them. And I think that was definitely a defining moment in our adoption journey, was just physically putting our eyes on these sweet little faces who have names, who have stories. And as we are taking one of them to a better place, to her forever home, where we know she's going to be loved, cared for, and all of those things, we know that so many of them are never going to experience what Mikaela has gotten to experience, and that is heartbreaking. And so for us, just understanding that the need for families to step up and to say yes to these orphans is extremely huge, extremely overwhelming. And I've said this multiple times. We're in our third adoption. Now, I know a lot of families who have adopted 9, 10, 12 times. Amazing. We are in our third adoption, and I feel like we are not doing anything for the orphan crisis. Because when you look at the orphan crisis, millions of kids who have no family, who will never have a family, it's just very burdening, it's saddening, it's frustrating, and I feel like, yeah, we brought 2 into our home, hoping to bring a third one and hoping to bring home more after that, but I still feel like we're doing absolutely nothing.
And that comes back to, I think, the enormity of the problem. You know, we talk about 7 to 9 million kids around the world that are actually in orphanages or institutions. That doesn't include all the kids that live on the street. And when you look at it that way, 2 things happen. One, for those that have been burdened with the enormity of the situation, it becomes so great that you feel like no matter what you do, you're not having an effect. And that's where we are. But for those people like us, you have to remember this. You can't change the world for 7 million orphans, but you can change the world for 1. And that's what you have to keep your eyes on, that you're not trying to do everything, because you can't. None of us can. Mm-hmm. But you can do 1 thing, or you can do 2 things, or you can do 3 things. And for others, the problem becomes is when we go and speak to people at churches or wherever, and we say, hey, you know, there's 7 million kids in orphanages around the world who need adopting. That's so overwhelming to people that they feel like there's nothing they can do, or 7 million don't have a name, but 1 do. So it's easy to overlook 7 million because it's a number. It's harder to overlook a child when you see their face and they have a name attached to them, because it's a whole different world when you meet that child and begin to think, they're just like me. You know, they have needs, they have traumas in life, they need somebody to step up for them.
So as I was thinking about the third reason in why we chose adoption and why we continue to choose adoption, I really didn't have a specific, like, oh, this is number 3. So we're just going to like share a whole bunch of stuff for you real quick, because we're good at that. But we're also very hungry, so we're going to try to keep it short so we can go eat. But
she's taking me to dinner.
Yeah, but we do have a lot to share. So we see adoption as a way to serve Christ. I think Christians this day and age, and this can get off on a whole other topic, so don't go down that rabbit hole. You know, there's so much talk about self and so much talk about what God can do for me and how God can bless me as a Christian because I'm a good person and I'm doing all of these good things, and I tithe and I serve at, you know, community, you know, homeless shelter, and, you know, and all of these things. And we're missing why we have chosen to follow Christ, and that is to bring glory to Him in all that we do. Does that mean that we're perfect? No, neither one of us are perfect, and we have a lot of yuck that goes on just like everyone else. But at the end of the day, our hearts are not looking for perfection, and the Lord is not looking for perfection. The Lord is just looking for those who are willing, those who are able to say, okay, Lord, I have all these fears, I have all these questions. You're stretching me way thinner than I ever thought I could be stretched. But I'm choosing to do this because I want to bring glory to you, and because my relationship with Christ has got to be about how Ashley and how the Phelps family can live a life that is separate from the world, that people can look at us and say they're different. They're doing something different in their family. They're not perfect, but they're doing something different. And not only are we doing something different, but we are intentionally seeking out, how can we serve you? How can we bring glory to your name? How can we choose things in our life that are going to open the doors for conversations to share Jesus with others? I used to get frustrated with him when we first brought Mika home, because he would tell everybody about Mika's adoption. Do you remember? And I just remember.
I still do.
I mean, you still do.
But it's Izzy's. I mean, it's both of them. But
yeah, and he still does. But I remember there for a while, it ruffled my feathers a little bit. Not because I didn't want her adoption story being shared, but because I'm one, like, I don't like to talk about myself. I don't like to talk. Like, I want to talk about you and what's going on in your world. And I felt like Stan was like, listen to me, listen to my story, but that's not what it was.
Going back to something she just said, I think it was Francis Chan that said something to this effect. He said, if our lives as Christians make sense to the world, there's something wrong with our lives. Because we have a lot of people that ask us things such as, why would you adopt a child like Isabel? Or why would you adopt special needs children? We actually had one person said, can't you adopt children who are going to be productive in society? Which, you know, we all look at that and was like, oh my gosh, who could ask that? But you know what? It's fine that our lives or our choices aren't making sense to the world. They're not supposed to. We're to live we're called to a different life by Christ than people are in the world. And this is what God has called Christians to obedience. That's what He's looking for, is us to obey. Scripture is very clear. If you will love me, you'll obey me. Those that say they love me but don't obey me are liars, and the truth is not in them. And honestly, there's a lot of people that claim to be followers of Jesus who say they love Him, but they don't obey Him. So you have to call into question, do they really love Him? And so that's what we mean when we say we're doing this to serve Christ. We're not doing this to try to convince Christ to love us. He loves us whether we are adopting or not. We're doing this because we love Him. And because He's created these children And I can explain it this way. There's so many broken homes in the world today. And so for those of you that have amended families, you have stepchildren, if you married someone and that person said, I love you, but they don't show love to your children, would you really think that person loved you? Because if they truly love you, they're going to love your children too. They're not going to always like everything they do. They may be annoyed by them. But because of their love for you, that love is going to carry over into a love for your children. And that's how it is with our God. If you truly love Him, you're going to love people. It's just the way it is. And I'm not a people person. Everybody can tell you. I grew up, I like to be alone. I get frustrated with people, especially in the kind of work I do. But the more I look at Christ, the more I'm broken for people, especially children.
The going back to like how our thought processes have changed over the past 6 years. Another point I wanted to make, because I know there's a lot of you on here, you're waiting for a big sign from God. You're waiting for like, oh, the Phelps family, they had a specific calling to Michaela. We had a specific calling to our Isabel from China. I don't have that, so I guess the Lord doesn't want me to adopt. So let me just share this with you. When we were in the beginning stages of our first adoption, we got an email every month of like 300-400 orphans in the Philippines, and what we would do is we would go through those, and once we would find a child that we feel like we might want to pursue for adoption, we would inquire and all of that and request to adopt them. That was heartbreaking. Going back to these faces have a story, they have a name, they have a soul. Like, I mean, we read stories of kids being found in shoeboxes on the side of the road. Our Isabel was found in a farmer's field 3 months after her mother had her. And her mother, I guess, chose to give her up for whatever reason. Like, stories of just, it was very saddening. It was very saddening, and it was very eye-opening. And I remember Stan and I were petrified that we were going to choose the wrong child. Like somehow, you know, we were so mighty and powerful that we were going to mess up God's plan for our family and His purpose in calling us to adoption, that we were like going to choose the wrong child.
As if we could choose the wrong child and God would say, ho, ho,
yeah.
I don't want that child chosen, I want this child.
Yeah.
While God can be specific in His calling to certain people for certain reasons, that doesn't mean other people aren't called to goodness.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that in Scripture God says to take care of widows and orphans, well, He specifically called us to Isabel and Mika. Does that mean that if you're not called to a specific child, that you don't have to take care of widows and orphans? That's not at all what that means. Your job is to take care of widows and orphans, and to go and do that. Now, if He calls you specifically somewhere else to go to a specific country or child, you follow Him. But until then, you revert back to what you're already commanded to do, which is take care of widows and orphans. It may look different for different people based on different things, but it's for you to go ahead and act on. You don't have to wait to whether you do goodness or not. You do goodness.
Yeah, and so that's kind of like that's where I was going with this whole topic right here. Was in the beginning we were so focused on choosing the right child and the child the Lord wanted for our family, in our family. And then here comes Isabel, and it's very clear we were to adopt her. So here comes our third adoption process of our little girl in China. We were very just nonchalant about choosing to adopt her. We already knew we were going to adopt again. We didn't know where. We didn't know who. None of that. And I got ready to sit down and advocate for this little girl. And I had all these reasons why I needed to find a family who could adopt this little girl. And I remember God clearly was just like, Ashley, why not you? Why can't you bring home this little girl? And Stan and I were sitting out here on the back patio, and I asked him, I'm like, why can't we adopt her? And he was just, yeah. And so I think the next day we chose to adopt her. Why? Because the Lord has already instructed us to take care of the widows and the orphans. He doesn't care which orphan you bring into His home, to your home. They're His children, created intricately, just like he created you and he created me. So why would he not bless our journey in choosing to take in one of his children? So yes, pray that, you know, the Lord leads you and guides you and all of those things. Pray for wisdom. Absolutely. We're not saying, you know, just be kind of flippant and nonchalant about adoption, but quit waiting for the big sign. Quit waiting for this like whole cool story to like kind of come together and you can have like this dramatic adoption story. Because while there are some out there, our adoption of our third little girl, whom we're going to name Lily Grace, I mean, I don't know how this story is going to unfold because she hasn't even come home, but it really has not been like this huge story to be like, it wasn't like Michaela's and it wasn't like Isabel's. I feel like it's being molded and sculpted and shaped just as the Lord wants it to. And the reason why is because I feel like Stan and I are just very like, okay, God, yep, we're going to choose adoption. Lead us, you know, open and close the doors you need to close or open, and we're ready, willing, and able. And I think that that's all he wants, is just a family who's like, yes, Lord, I have no clue what you want me to do, where to go, how to do it, how am I going to pay for it, is my spouse going to be on board? He just wants your yes.
A lot of times when God calls us to things, it's because we're not listening to begin with. And he's calling us because we're ignoring him. And then once he gets our attention, he shouldn't have to continue to call us to certain things. We should immediately do what we already know he's instructed us to do. Like love your husbands and obey your husband and submit to your husbands.
Got you. So after you've heard Stan and I's heart on adoption and what our adoption journey and processes have looked like, hopefully you've gathered this idea that truly adoption is less about an orphan. And I know that some people are like, what? That doesn't make sense. Adoption should be primarily about bringing glory to Christ and serving him. And that is what our hearts are in choosing adoption. And that is why we have chosen adoption and why we will continue to choose adoption. And we hope to share this perspective because I think some people don't think of it like that, especially Christians. They think of it, I think they start looking at, you know, bringing in a stranger into your home. How are my other kids going to react? What are finances going to look like? How am I going to fund this adoption? Will that child go to daycare or school? Or how can I meet his special needs? And while all of those things should be thought about and addressed, just know that at the end of the day, you should be choosing adoption because it's what Christ has already called us to do. And if you will just say yes and you will just say, okay, I'm here, I'm ready, willing, and able, I don't know what I'm doing, I promise you he's going to lead you and he's going to guide you and he's going to provide for you far more than you could have ever imagined. Thank y'all for joining us. If you have any questions about adoption, or if you're struggling with choosing to adopt, whatever it is, leave it in the comments below. We read every single comment. If you are truly interested in walking out an adoption journey, we would be glad to help you, share our knowledge with you. I feel like we've got some wisdom. We can share our wisdom with you, and that's what we want. So we're going to close it out here because the kids are back there and they're hungry and Isabella's starting to squeal. Thank y'all for joining us, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.